I wasn't looking for another woman, that's the truth. I was actively, aggressively not looking. My heart was a boarded-up house, a condemned property with yellow tape strung across the porch. The last inspector, a woman named Chloe with eyes the color of a summer storm and a laugh that could shatter glass, had deemed it structurally unsound and walked away without a backward glance, leaving me in the wreckage. So I did what any architect with a broken foundation would do. I ran. I rented a cabin site unseen, a place so deep in the woods that cell service was a rumor, and the nearest town was a punctuation mark on a map. My plan was simple: solitude, whiskey, and the hollow comfort of my own misery. I was going to architect my way out of this grief, drafting blueprints for a life that had no room for anyone else, especially not for a woman. I had told myself, my sister, and a particularly persistent bottle of bourbon that I was done. I don't date women. The words had become a shield, a mantra to ward off the ghost of Chloe's touch, the phantom scent of her perfume on my pillows. The cabin, when I finally found it down a gravel road that seemed to actively resent my car's presence, was more rust than rustic. The listing photos had been generous, performing the kind of photographic alchemy that turns peeling paint into charming patina and a damp, musty smell into earthy aroma. A fine drizzle was falling, clinging to the pines and turning the air into a cold, wet blanket. It suited my mood perfectly. I hauled my 2 suitcases and a box of non-perishable despair onto the porch, the wet wood groaning under my boots. The key was under a clay pot as promised, a piece of old, soft brass that felt heavy with the history of other people's escapes. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old fires, and something else, something sharp and clean like freshly cut wood. It was cold, a deep, penetrating chill that went straight to the bone. I dropped my bags, my breath pluming in front of my face, and went straight for the thermostat. I nudged the dial up, listening for the familiar click and rumble of a furnace kicking to life. Nothing, just the sigh of the wind outside and the drip, drip, drip of a leak somewhere I couldn't yet see. Fine. I was resourceful. I was an architect, a builder of things. I could handle a little cold. I found the breaker box in a dusty utility closet behind a stack of yellowed newspapers. Everything looked to be in order. I flipped the main breaker off and on again. Still nothing. A profound, stubborn silence. My carefully constructed wall of self-pity began to crack. This wasn't tragic solitude. This was just inconvenient. This was a problem that required a solution, and my only solution was frozen in a box in the kitchen. Defeated, I found the welcome binder on the coffee table. It was filled with laminated pages detailing Wi-Fi passwords that wouldn't work and checkout procedures I had no intention of following. On the last page, under emergency maintenance, was a single name and a phone number. Lena, caretaker. I stared at the name. My phone had one bar, a flickering, desperate little line. It was a sign. The universe was testing the firmness of my new resolve to be an island. I was failing. I stabbed at the numbers, my fingers already numb. It rang twice before a voice answered, a voice low and calm, like stones settling at the bottom of a river. Yeah. No greeting, just a single patient syllable. Hi, I said, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. My name is Clara. I'm renting the old Miller cabin. The heat, it's not working. There was a pause on the other end, filled with the sound of something rhythmic, like sanding. Did you check the breaker? Yes, and the thermostat. It's dead. Another pause. Propane tank out back? Is the gauge in the green? I trudged to the back door and peered through the rain-streaked glass. A large white tank sat near the tree line, a small, mud-spattered gauge on its side. The needle was firmly, unequivocally, on E. It's empty, I said, the words feeling like a final surrender. A sigh came through the phone, not of annoyance, but of resignation. Right, the delivery was scheduled for yesterday. Guess they didn't make it up the mountain with the rain. I'll be there in 20. The line went dead. 20 minutes. 20 minutes until a stranger named Lena would arrive to witness the full scope of my incompetence. I spent the time trying and failing to start a fire in the huge stone fireplace. The wood was damp, the flue was jammed, and soon the room smelled less of cozy hearth and more of acrid smoke and my own mounting frustration. I was huddled in my coat on the hearth, shivering, when headlights cut through the gloom outside. A moment later, a pair of sturdy-looking boots appeared on the porch, followed by the person wearing them. She didn't knock. The door just opened, and she was there, framed in the doorway against the gray evening. Lena. She was taller than I'd expected, with broad shoulders that filled out a worn, dark green flannel jacket. Her hair was a dark, unruly braid tucked under a beanie, with a few damp strands stuck to her temples. She carried a heavy-duty flashlight in one hand and a metal toolbox in the other, and she moved with an unhurried competence that I immediately resented. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of hazel, scanned the room, taking in the smoky air, my pathetic pile of kindling, and me, a miserable lump in a designer coat. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, a quick dip of her chin. "You're Clara." It wasn't a question. Her gaze lingered on me for a second longer than necessary, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, before she turned her attention to the fireplace. "Flue's probably full of squirrel nests," she said, her voice the same steady low tone from the phone. It had a texture to it, like worn leather. "Happens every spring." She set her toolbox down with a solid thud and crouched by the hearth, her presence suddenly filling the cold, cavernous room. The smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, clinging to her clothes, sawdust, pine needles, and the clean metallic scent of rain. It was the smell of the woods themselves, distilled into a person. It was the smell of everything I had run away to, and everything I was terrified of letting in. And just like that, the quiet I had craved felt crowded. Lena worked with an economy of motion that was both fascinating and infuriating. She didn't waste a single movement. First, the flue. She laid an old canvas dropcloth on the hearth, produced a set of long-handled tools from a bag I hadn't noticed, and within 10 minutes, a shower of dried leaves, twigs, and other debris came tumbling down the chimney. She swept it all up without a word, her movements precise and clean. I just stood there, useless, hugging my arms against the cold that had now settled deep into my bones. "You're an architect, right?" she asked, her back still to me as she tested the flue lever. It slid open with a satisfying swoosh. The question caught me off guard. "How did you know that?" "The rental agency mentions it. Said you were here for a creative retreat." She said the words creative retreat with a faint, almost imperceptible irony, as if she knew it was a euphemism for running away. "Right," I said, feeling my cheeks flush. "Something like that." She turned then, leaning against the stone mantelpiece. The firelight from the now functioning fireplace I hadn't been able to start flickered across her face, carving shadows under her strong cheekbones. "Doesn't look very creative?" Her eyes flicked to my suitcases, still sitting forlornly by the door. "Or very retreat-like?" A spark of my old self, the one that hadn't been hollowed out by Chloe, flared to life. Well, the ambiance was rather spoiled by the impending hypothermia. A corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Fair enough. The propane's a bigger problem. The truck won't make it up here until this storm lets up. Could be a day, maybe two." My heart sank. "So, no heat? For 2 days?" "No furnace," she corrected. "There's heat." She gestured with her chin toward the now roaring fire she'd built with 3 perfectly placed logs and a single match. "And I have a couple of space heaters at my workshop. I'll bring them over. It'll be fine." She said it with such calm certainty that I almost believed her. But fine involved her. It involved dependency. And I had come here specifically to be dependent on no one. "Thank you," I managed, the words tasting like ash. "I'll go get them." She pulled her beanie down lower and headed for the door. "Lock this behind me. I'll knock when I get back." She was gone as quickly as she'd arrived, leaving behind the scent of wood smoke and the unsettling warmth of the fire. I did as she said, sliding the deadbolt home. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I was alone again, but the solitude felt different now. It was punctuated by her impending return. I spent the next 15 minutes unpacking, a frantic burst of activity to keep my mind from circling the drain. I put my clothes in the ridiculously small dresser, arranged my toiletries on the bathroom counter, and set up my laptop on the heavy oak table that served as a desk. I was trying to impose my own order on the place, to reclaim it, but her presence lingered. It was in the perfectly stacked pile of firewood she'd left by the hearth, in the clean sweep of the stone, in the way the air no longer felt stagnant. When the knock came, it was solid and firm. I opened the door to find her standing there, a black space heater in each hand, rain dripping from the brim of her hat. "Where do you want them?" she asked, stepping inside and stamping the water from her boots on the mat. "One for the bedroom, I guess." I pointed vaguely down the short hallway. She nodded and carried one back, the cord dragging behind her. I watched her go, the way her flannel shirt stretched across her shoulders. It was a completely impersonal observation, the kind an architect makes about lines and form. That's what I told myself anyway. When she returned, she set the other heater near the sofa. "This one's pretty powerful. Don't put it too close to anything." "I won't," I said, feeling like a child being given instructions. There was an awkward pause. The fire crackled. The rain drummed on the roof. She stood by the door, seeming ready to leave, but not quite leaving. "I have stew on," she said suddenly, her gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "Made a big pot yesterday. Plenty to spare if you're hungry. Probably not much in the way of groceries up here for you yet." The offer hung in the air between us. It was practical. It was neighborly. It was also somehow terrifyingly intimate. My brain screamed, "No. Say no, lock the door, and eat the sad protein bar at the bottom of your purse. Be the island." "I wouldn't want to impose," I said, my voice stiff. Lena just shrugged, her eyes finally meeting mine. They were clear and direct, with no hidden agenda I could decipher. "It's just stew, better than a protein bar." She knew. Of course she knew. That little twitch was back at the corner of her mouth. The sheer absurdity of the situation. Me, shivering in a $1,000 coat, about to be saved from starvation by a stranger with a pot of stew, broke through my pride. A small, rusty laugh escaped me. "Okay," I said. "Stew sounds good." "All right," she said, and this time, the twitch blossomed into a small, genuine smile. It changed her whole face, softening the stoic lines around her eyes. "Give me a few minutes to bring it over." As she walked back out into the rain, I sank onto the sofa, the warmth from the fire finally starting to seep into my clothes. The house was no longer just a shell for my misery. It was a place where a stranger had built me a fire and was now bringing me food. The thought was both comforting and profoundly unsettling. My meticulously planned isolation had lasted less than 3 hours, and the woman who had breached its walls smelled like the forest and had a smile that made something deep inside me, something I thought was long dead, stir uneasily. The promised stew arrived in a heavy ceramic pot, carried by Lena with oven mitts. Steam billowed from under the lid, smelling of rosemary and slow-cooked beef. She also brought 2 thick slices of dark, crusty bread wrapped in a tea towel. She set it all on the coffee table without ceremony. "Plates are in the cabinet above the sink," she said, already turning to leave. "Wait," I said. the word out before I could stop it. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. You should stay and eat since you made it. It was a clumsy invitation, born more of a sudden, sharp dread of being alone with my thoughts than any real hospitality. To my surprise, she considered it for a moment, her hazel eyes appraising me. You sure? Yes, I said, more firmly this time. It's the least I can do. You saved me from freezing to death. She gave a slight huff of air, a sound that might have been a laugh. Hardly, but all right. She shed her damp jacket, hanging it on a peg by the door. Underneath, she wore a simple gray Henley that fit her in a way that was both practical and, my brain unhelpfully supplied, extremely flattering. She moved with a quiet confidence, getting 2 bowls and spoons from the kitchen as if she'd done it 100 times. We ate in near silence, sitting on the floor by the fire like 2 survivors of a shipwreck. The stew was incredible, rich and hearty, the kind of food that feels like a physical anchor. The only sounds were the clinking of our spoons against ceramic, the crackle of the logs, and the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof. The silence wasn't awkward, though. It was full, grounded. This is really good, I said, my voice soft. My grandmother's recipe, she replied, not looking up from her bowl. She believed you could fix most things with a long simmer. I thought about Chloe, about the quick, brutal fire of our relationship and its even quicker implosion. There had been no simmering. It had been all flash and burn. Some things, maybe, I murmured, mostly to myself. Lena heard me. She glanced up, her spoon halfway to her mouth. Her gaze was steady, not pitying, just present. You ran away from something, she said. It was a statement of fact, delivered in that same low, even tone. My defenses bristled. I'm here to work. Right, she said, the single word conveying a world of disbelief. She took a bite of stew, chewed thoughtfully, and then looked at me again. The last person who rented this cabin for a creative retreat was a finance bro who'd just been through a messy divorce. He spent a month drinking expensive scotch and trying to learn the banjo. Badly. Despite myself, a real laugh escaped me. Am I that transparent? People who are happy don't run to a broken-down cabin at the top of a mountain in the middle of a storm, she said simply. They run to the beach. She was right, of course. It was so plainly, obviously true that arguing felt pointless. I set my bowl down, the warmth of it spreading through my palms. It was a breakup, I admitted, the words feeling strange and foreign in this quiet, firelit space. A bad one. Sorry to hear that. She didn't press for details. She just kept eating her stew, giving me the space to either say more or let it lie. The lack of pressure was disarming. With my friends, with my sister, their sympathy had felt like an excavation. Each question a shovel digging for the gory details. Lena's quiet was a blanket. She left, I said, the words spilling out into the space she'd created. We were together for 3 years. I was designing our house. I thought it was forever. I traced the rim of my bowl with my thumb. Turns out, forever had an expiration date. She met someone else. A man. The last word came out with a bitterness that surprised even me. Lena was quiet for a long time, just watching the fire dance. I was sure I'd said too much, that the raw, pathetic truth of my heartbreak was too heavy for this fragile truce we'd established. That's a special kind of hurt, she said finally, her voice soft, when they leave you for a whole different roadmap. The accuracy of her words was a punch to the gut. It wasn't just that Chloe had left me for someone else. She had left our entire world, the shared language and landscape of our life as 2 women together, for something completely other. It was an invalidation of everything we had been. Yeah, I whispered. It is. She finished her stew and set the bowl aside. She drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. She looked solid, immovable, like one of the ancient stones in the fireplace. I lived in the city for a while, she said, her eyes on the flames. Portland. I was with someone for almost a decade. We had a life, a dog, a brunch schedule. A faint smile touched her lips. She was a musician, all passion and fire. It was intoxicating and exhausting. One day, I realized the quietest moments in our apartment were when she wasn't there. The peace was so loud it was all I could hear. She looked over at me, her hazel eyes catching the firelight. So I left, came back here, built my workshop, found a different kind of quiet. The parallel was unspoken, but clear. We were two sides of the same coin, the one who was left and the one who left. Both of us had ended up in the woods, seeking refuge in the silence. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The fire was a bed of glowing embers. The initial tension between us had dissolved, replaced by a strange, shared melancholy. "I'm sorry," I said, "that you had to go through that." She just shrugged, a small, graceful movement of her shoulders. "It's just life. You build something, it falls down. You sweep up the pieces and build something new. Sometimes it's a house. Sometimes it's just a quiet evening." She stood up then, gathering our empty bowls. "I should let you get some rest." I wanted to ask her to stay. The thought was a sudden, sharp pang of longing that terrified me. I had craved solitude, and now the thought of it was a gaping maw. I stood up too, my legs stiff. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "For the fire, the heaters, the stew." "It's my job," she said, but her eyes told me it was more than that. At the door, she paused with her hand on her jacket. "The storm's supposed to break by morning. I'll call the propane company first thing. But the roads might still be slick. Just be careful if you go anywhere." "I'm not planning on going anywhere," I said. And for the first time, the thought didn't feel like a prison sentence. It felt like a possibility. She nodded, then pulled on her jacket and beanie, transforming back into the capable caretaker. But I couldn't unsee the woman who had shared her story by the fire. As she opened the door, a blast of cold, clean air swept into the room, smelling of wet earth and pine. "Good night, Clara," she said. "Good night, Lena." I watched from the window as her flashlight beam cut a path through the darkness toward a smaller cabin I hadn't noticed before, further down the property. I locked the door, but the room didn't feel empty. It felt watched over. I went to bed in a room warmed by a space heater she had provided, my stomach full of food she had made, my mind replaying the quiet cadence of her voice. I had come here to be alone, to prove I didn't need anyone. But as I drifted off to sleep, listening to the gentle hum of the heater and the distant sigh of the wind in the trees, I had to admit a terrifying truth. I was less alone than I had been in months. And for the first time since Chloe left, I wasn't entirely sure I minded. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky the color of pale porcelain and air so crisp it felt like a physical thing against my skin. The propane truck, a lumbering beast of a vehicle, arrived mid-morning, its hydraulic sighs and clanks a rude intrusion into the newfound peace. Lena was there to meet it, directing the driver with a few words and a point of her finger. I watched them from the window, a mug of coffee warming my hands. She moved with that same unhurried purpose, her body a study in practical grace. She was wearing the same beanie, but had swapped the flannel for a thick gray wool sweater that looked soft and impossibly warm. When the truck rumbled away, she came over, not to the front door, but to the porch steps, where she sat and began methodically checking the connections on the tank herself. I found myself wanting an excuse to talk to her. My coffee was getting cold. I could offer her some. It was a simple, neighborly thing to do. It was Also, a transparent ploy, and we both knew it. I opened the door. Coffee? She looked up, squinting against the bright morning sun. Thanks, but I've had my fill for the day. She tightened a valve with a wrench, the metallic scrape echoing in the quiet. Furnace should kick on for you now. Let me know if there are any issues. She was all business again. The vulnerable woman from the night before was gone, replaced by the competent caretaker. A part of me was relieved. A bigger part was disappointed. It seems fine, I said, leaning against the doorframe. Thank you for everything. No problem. She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. Her hands? I'd noticed them the night before, but in the clear light of day, they were even more compelling. They were strong and capable, with clean, short nails and a network of faint, pale scars across the knuckles. They were hands that made things, fixed things, unlike my hands, which mostly tapped on keyboards and sketched lines that had lately failed to cohere into anything meaningful. So, what's a city architect build in the woods? She asked, her gaze sweeping over the cabin and the trees beyond, as if searching for my project. I felt a familiar coil of shame. My project was a lie, a flimsy excuse I'd told my family and myself. I'm, designing a series of sustainable microhomes, I said, the lie tasting stale on my tongue. Just conceptual stuff. Microhomes, she repeated, a thoughtful look on her face. Like tiny houses? Sort of. More focused on ecological integration, using reclaimed materials, passive solar, that sort of thing. I was spouting jargon, building a wall of words to hide behind. She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on me. I had the distinct feeling she could see right through my flimsy facade. My workshop is mostly reclaimed timber, she said, from an old barn that came down a few winters ago. The wood has character. Her workshop, the place she'd mentioned, the source of that sawdust smell. You're a woodworker? I asked, genuinely curious now. Something like that, she said, echoing my own evasiveness from the day before. A small smile played on her lips. She knew exactly what she was doing. I make furniture, custom pieces mostly. Suddenly, I saw her hands differently. I imagined them planing a piece of maple, carving a joint, sanding a surface until it was as smooth as silk. The image was unexpectedly vivid. I'd love to see it sometime, I said, the words bolder than I'd intended. Her smile widened slightly. Maybe, when you're not so busy with your concepts. The gentle jab hit its mark. She was calling my bluff, but in a way that wasn't mean. It was an invitation. Show me something real. Right, I said, a flush creeping up my neck. An awkward silence fell. I needed to go back inside. She needed to get back to her work. Neither of us moved. Well, she said finally, breaking the spell, I've got a table that's not going to finish itself. Holler if you need. Anything! She gave a little wave and started walking back toward her cabin, her stride long and easy. I watched her until she disappeared among the trees, then went back inside, the silence of the cabin pressing in on me. The furnace was humming now, filling the space with bland, artificial warmth. It was nothing like the living heat of the fire. I sat at my laptop, opened the design file for the micro homes, and stared at the blank screen. All I could think about was the character of reclaimed wood and the woman with sawdust in her hair. The next few days fell into a strange rhythm. I would wake up early, make coffee, and pretend to work, moving lines around on my screen, creating structures that felt as soulless as I did. In the afternoon, I'd force myself to go for a walk, my boots crunching on the damp earth. My path would inevitably take me past her workshop, a low-slung building made of that dark, weathered wood she described. The windows were large, and sometimes I could see her inside, a silhouette moving through clouds of sawdust, the drone of a power tool a steady hum in the background. I never went in. She never came out. But we were aware of each other. It was a strange, silent orbit. One afternoon, I found a small, perfectly carved wooden bird on my porch railing. It was no bigger than my thumb, sanded so smooth it felt like a worry stone in my palm. There was no note. There didn't need to be. The next day, I left a bar of expensive, small-batch dark chocolate I'd brought from the city on the stump outside her workshop. The day after that, the chocolate was gone. In its place was a small bundle of kindling tied with twine and a single perfect pine cone. It was a conversation without words, a series of small, careful offerings. It was safe. It required nothing of me. One evening, my sister called. Her name, Anna, flashed on my phone screen, a bright intrusion from the world I'd left behind. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Clara, you're alive," she chirped, her voice painfully loud in the quiet cabin. "I was about to send a search party." "I'm fine, Anna, just working." "Right, working." The skepticism in her voice was a physical force. "So, how's Operation Forget Chloe going? Have you sworn off women for good this time? Or are you just communing with squirrels?" Her words, meant to be lighthearted, landed like tiny, sharp stones. They reminded me of my own brittle pronouncements, the walls I'd tried to build. "I'm not swearing off anyone," I said, my voice tight. "I'm just taking a break." "A break? Uh-huh. Well, just be careful up there in the wilderness. Don't want you getting your heart broken by a lumberjack. Or a lumberjill." She laughed. I didn't. "I have to go, Anna. The connection's bad." It was a lie. The call was perfectly clear. Okay, grumpy pants. Call me soon. Love you." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the phone heavy in my hand. Lumberjill. The word conjured an instant, vivid image of Lena, her strong hands, her steady gaze. A hot, prickly shame washed over me. Was that what this was? Was I just projecting my old patterns onto the first available woman who showed me a shred of kindness? I told myself I was done with this. I meant it. The small, silent exchanges, the bird, the chocolate, it had all felt safe. But Anna's call had named it, labeled it, and now it felt dangerous. I was a recovering addict, and Lena was a bottle of top-shelf whiskey left open on the table. I had to stay away. I resolved, with a grim sense of purpose, to keep to myself. No more walks past the workshop. No more silent gifts. I would be the island I came here to be. My resolve lasted exactly 36 hours. It was broken by a bookshelf. The main room of the cabin was dominated by a wall of built-in shelves, empty save for a few dusty paperbacks left by previous tenants. They were poorly made, sagging in the middle, an offense to my architectural sensibilities. I'd been ignoring them, but after my phone call with Anna, they became a focal point for all my frustrated energy. I couldn't fix my life, but I could fix a damn bookshelf. I spent a morning measuring, sketching, and calculating loads, losing myself in the familiar comfort of angles and dimensions. I discovered the shelves weren't just sagging. They were barely attached to the wall. One solid tug and the whole structure groaned, threatening to collapse. I needed tools I didn't have, a drill, a level, anchors. I knew exactly who would have them. For an hour, I paced the cabin, arguing with myself. Don't do it. Go to town. Buy your own tools. Maintain the perimeter. But the town was a 40-minute drive, and the hardware store was probably closed. And the truth, the small, embarrassing truth, was that I wanted to see her. Defeated, I walked the path to her workshop, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. As I got closer, I could hear the soft scrape of a hand plane, a rhythmic, meditative sound. The big workshop door was open to the afternoon sun. I hovered at the edge of the light, feeling like an intruder. Lena was at a workbench, her back to me. She was focused on a long plank of what looked like cherry wood, her body moving in sync with the tool in her hands. Shavings curled up at her feet like fallen leaves. The air smelled incredible. of sawdust and wood glue and something else, something uniquely her. I cleared my throat. Lena? She didn't startle. She finished one long, smooth pass with the plane before setting it down gently. She turned, wiping a sheen of sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. A smudge of sawdust clung to her cheekbone. Clara, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were curious. Everything okay at the cabin? It's fine, it's just the bookshelves. They're a disaster. I was going to try and fix them, but I don't have any tools. I felt my cheeks heat up. I was wondering if I could borrow a drill and maybe a level? She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I braced myself for a polite refusal, a reminder of professional boundaries. Instead, she gestured with her head toward the back of the workshop. Better yet, I'll give you a hand. Those things have been a death trap for years. I've just been waiting for a tenant with enough good sense to complain about them. Relief washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. Oh, you don't have to do that. I know, she said, pulling her work gloves off, but a two-person job is faster. Besides, she added, a glint in her eye, I want to see what a city architect does with a pile of crooked pine. Her challenge was gentle, laced with humor. It felt like an opening. We walked back to my cabin together, the silence comfortable. She carried a canvas tool bag that seemed to contain every tool known to man. Back in the cabin, she surveyed the shelves with a critical eye. Yep, shoddy work. She ran a hand along a sagging board. No support. And these aren't even anchored to the studs. For the next 2 hours, we worked. Or rather, she worked and I assisted. She showed me how to use the stud finder, how to drill pilot holes, how to sink the anchors. Her instructions were clear and concise, her patience endless. She never once made me feel incompetent, even when I nearly dropped the drill on my foot. We fell into an easy rhythm. I'd hold the board steady while she drilled. She'd check my measurements with her level. We were close, closer than we'd been before. My shoulder brushed hers as we reached for the same screw. I'd breathe in the scent of her skin, a mix of sawdust and soap, when she leaned past me. Each accidental touch was a small electric shock. My carefully constructed defenses were crumbling with every turn of the screwdriver. So, she said, breaking a long silence as she tightened the final bracket. That bad, huh? The breakup? Her voice was low, meant only for me. The question was so direct, so out of the blue, it knocked the wind out of me. I fumbled with the level in my hands, suddenly unable to look at her. What makes you say that? You're trying to rebuild a stranger's house, she said, not unkindly. People who are happy don't go looking for projects like this. I leaned against the now sturdy bookshelf, the solid wood a comfort at my back. I was tired of the lies, tired of the pretense. It wasn't just a breakup, I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was an erasure. She didn't just leave me, she undid me. I finally looked at her. She had stopped working and was watching me, her expression full of a deep, quiet empathy that was more devastating than any pity. She told me she needed something normal, something easier. The word normal hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Lena's jaw tightened. There's nothing easy about lying to yourself, she said, her voice tight with a sudden, fierce anger, or about building a life on a foundation that isn't true. She was talking about Chloe, but I had the feeling she was also talking about something, or someone, from her own past. The raw emotion in her voice was a revelation. The calm, stoic caretaker had cracks in her own foundation. We finished the job in silence, the emotional weight of my confessions settling between us. The shelves were perfect now, straight, strong, and secure. A small, tangible victory in a sea of emotional chaos. As she packed up her tools, the late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Thank you, Lena, I said, for this. You did most of the work, she lied gently. No, I didn't, I said, but thank you for letting me think I did. A real smile spread across her face, reaching her eyes. You're welcome. At the door, she paused. For what it's worth, she said, her gaze serious, there's nothing more normal than wanting to build something true. And there's nothing wrong with the person you choose to build it with. She didn't wait for a response. She just nodded once and left, leaving me alone in a room that suddenly felt more like my own. I ran my hand over the smooth, solid wood of the new shelves. She hadn't just helped me fix a piece of furniture. She had taken a piece of my broken narrative and, with a few quiet words, helped me see it differently. The erasure, the invalidation. She had seen it, named it, and called it what it was, a lie. I had come to this mountain to be alone, to prove I was an island. But Lena wasn't a ship trying to dock at my shores. She was more like the bedrock beneath the water, a steady, unseen presence that made the whole island possible. And the thought of her, of the quiet strength in her hands, and the unexpected fire in her voice, was beginning to feel less like a threat and more like a foundation. The bookshelf incident shifted something fundamental between us. The silent, careful orbit we'd maintained collapsed into a more regular gravitational pull. The next day, I didn't walk past her workshop. I walked to it. I brought 2 mugs of coffee with me this time, a silent insistence. She was sanding a magnificent tabletop, the grain of the wood swirling like a topographical map. She saw me coming and switched off the sander, the sudden silence profound. She took the mug I offered, her fingers brushing mine. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a jolt straight up my arm. Thank you, she said, her voice slightly rough from the dust. She took a sip, her eyes closing for a moment in appreciation. This is good. Much better than the instant stuff I've been drinking. It's the least I can do, I said, leaning against a workbench piled high with clamps and wood scraps. You're a lifesaver and a bookshelf saver. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my stomach do a slow, lazy flip. I had a feeling you wouldn't be able to sleep at night with those shelves sagging at you. You have no idea, I admitted. It was a structural and moral failing. We stood there for a few minutes, drinking our coffee, surrounded by the organized chaos of her creative space. Tools hung in neat rows on a pegboard wall. Blueprints and sketches were tacked up beside them. Stacks of lumber leaned against the far wall, each type labeled in a neat block script: oak, walnut, cherry. It was a sanctuary of competence. Can I see what you're working on? I asked, gesturing to the tabletop. Sure. She ran her hand over the surface, a gesture of both pride and affection. It's a dining table for a couple down in the valley. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary. She showed me the design, a simple, elegant drawing of a trestle table. It was beautiful, a perfect marriage of form and function. My architect's brain lit up. The joinery here, I said, pointing to a detail on the sketch. Is that a mortise and tenon? Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. Yeah, a wedged mortise and tenon. Most people don't know what that is. I'm an architect, I reminded her gently. We appreciate good joinery. The conversation flowed easily after that. We talked about wood, about design, about the satisfying weight of a well-made object. I told her about a building I'd designed, a small community library that used exposed timber framing. She told me about the challenge of finding sustainably harvested walnut. It was the first time I'd talked about my work without feeling like a fraud in months. I felt a flicker of the passion I thought Chloe had extinguished for good. As I was about to leave, she stopped me. Hey, Clara. I turned. She was holding a small, intricately carved box. I made this a while ago. It's just been sitting here. I thought you might like it. She held it out to me. It was made of a dark, rich wood, with a lid that fit so perfectly it was almost invisible. The top was inlaid with a delicate, stylized mountain range. It was exquisite. I was speechless. Lena, this is beautiful. I can't accept this. Why not? She asked, her gaze direct. It's a gift, but it's too much. It's a box, she said with a shrug. It's meant to hold things. Maybe it can hold your concepts. The callback to our first conversation was so gentle, so full of understanding, it made my throat ache. She was offering me a place to put the fragile, unformed parts of myself. I took the box, my fingers tracing the inlaid mountains. Thank you, I whispered. That night, I placed the wooden bird she had carved for me inside the box. It felt like a secret, a promise. The days that followed were filled with a quiet domesticity that felt both strange and deeply comforting. We didn't define it. We didn't talk about what it was. We just were. I'd bring her coffee in the morning. She'd leave a perfectly ripe tomato from her small garden on my porch in the afternoon. We fixed the leaky faucet under my kitchen sink together, a tangle of arms and wrenches in the small, dark space that left me breathless for reasons that had nothing to do with plumbing. We started eating dinner together most nights. Sometimes I'd cook, attempting to impress her with fancy city recipes that usually ended up slightly burned. She never commented, just ate everything I put in front of her. Other nights, she'd cook, simple, hearty meals like the stew, food that tasted of the earth in quiet patience. We'd talk for hours, sitting by the fire. I learned that she grew up in the house she now lived in, that she'd left for a decade, but the mountains had called her back. She learned about my chaotic family, my demanding job, my love for brutalist architecture. I told her about Chloe, not in a torrent of grief, but in small measured pieces. I told her about the good times, the way we used to laugh until we cried, the trips we took. Talking about it with Lena didn't feel like picking at a wound. It felt like forensic analysis, examining the wreckage to understand the structural failure. One evening, she told me about the musician in Portland. Her name was Maya. She was brilliant, Lena said, her eyes distant, fixed on the flames. When she played, it was like she could channel lightning. But the energy that fueled her music, it consumed everything else. Our apartment, our time, me. She sighed, a long, slow breath. I started to feel like a stagehand in the concert of her life, just there to make sure the lights were on and the equipment worked. She didn't mean for it to be that way. It's just who she was. So you left, I said softly. I had to, she said. I had to choose my own quiet over her noise. It was the hardest and kindest thing I've ever done for myself. She looked at me then, her hazel eyes clear and steady. And I've never regretted it. The confession settled in the space between us, a testament to her strength, to her profound self-knowledge. She wasn't running from anything. She had run to herself. And in doing so, she was creating a space where I felt like I could maybe, possibly, start to do the same. I was falling for her. The realization didn't come in a flash. It seeped in slowly, like the warmth from the fire. It was in the way my stomach fluttered when I heard her truck pull up. It was in the way I found myself saving anecdotes from my day to tell her over dinner. It was in the way the scent of sawdust on her clothes had become my favorite smell in the world. It was terrifying. I had built my life, my identity, around my relationships with women. When my last one ended, it felt like my whole city had been leveled. And here I was, sketching out blueprints for a new one on what felt like the exact same fault line. I don't date women, I had told myself. It was a lie, of course, a desperate attempt to protect myself. The truth was I only date women. I only love women. And that had been the source of my greatest joy and my most profound pain. I didn't know how to exist without that risk. But looking at Lena, her face soft in the firelight, her hands resting calmly on her knees, the risk, for the first time, felt less like a cliff edge and more like an open door. The turn came on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, which is perhaps why it caught me so completely by surprise. A cold snap had hit overnight, and a thick fog had rolled down from the higher peaks, blanketing the forest in a damp, gray silence. Lena was helping me with another one of my projects, a rickety screen door that kept slamming shut in the wind. We were outside on the porch, the air cold enough to see our breath. I was holding the door steady while she adjusted the hinge. Her proximity was a familiar ache now, a low hum of awareness that lived constantly under my skin. Her hair had escaped its usual braid and was curling in damp wisps around her face. I had an almost overwhelming urge to reach out and tuck a stray piece behind her ear. I clenched my fists at my sides. "Okay," she said, her voice muffled as she leaned closer to the frame. "Try it now." I let go of the door and gently pushed it. It swung shut with a soft, satisfying click. "Perfect," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face. "You're a miracle worker." She straightened up, a smudge of grease now on her other cheek to match the sawdust from the day before. She was so close I could count the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose. "Just a good hinge," she said, her voice low. Our eyes met and held. The easy camaraderie of the past week evaporated, replaced by something else, something thick and charged and utterly terrifying. The world seemed to narrow to the few inches of space between us. I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. I could see the way her pupils had dilated slightly. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the foggy silence. This was it, the moment I had been both dreading and longing for. The precipice. All I had to do was lean forward. All she had to do was not move back. Her gaze dropped to my mouth. It was for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. The air crackled. I felt myself sway toward her, a magnetic pull I was powerless to resist. And then she broke the contact. She took a half step back, her expression shuddering, becoming guarded and unreadable again. She cleared her throat and looked away, toward the fog-shrouded trees. "Well," she said, her voice strained, too loud in the quiet. "That should do it." The moment was gone. The door had slammed shut. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, washed over me, followed immediately by a wave of shame. What was I thinking? I was a mess, a tourist in her well-ordered life. She was kind, she was a good neighbor, but that's all it was. I had projected my own desperate longing onto her, turning her quiet competence into a romantic fantasy. "Right," I said, my voice equally strained. "Thank you, again." "No problem." She bent to pick up her screwdriver, fumbling with it for a second before getting a grip. She wouldn't look at me. I've gotta get back. That table isn't going to sand itself." She practically fled, her long strides eating up the path to her workshop without a backward glance. I stood on the porch, the cold seeping back into my bones, my hand resting on the perfectly fixed door. The soft click it had made now sounded like a final, definitive closing. I had been wrong. I had misread everything. The gifts, the shared meals, the long talks by the fire. That was just her. That was Lena. Kind, generous, solitary Lena, who fixed things for her tenants, who was friends with the broken people who washed up on her mountain. Friends. The word was a stone in my gut. I retreated into the cabin and into myself. The easy warmth of the past week felt like a foolish dream. I didn't see her for the rest of the day. I didn't bring her coffee the next morning. I stayed inside, staring at my blank laptop screen, the silence of the cabin once again feeling like a punishment. My internal monologue was a vicious spiral. Of course she's not interested. Look at you. You're a project, a fixer-upper. She's a master craftsman. She doesn't want to waste her time on something so fundamentally broken. That evening, there was a knock on the door. My heart leaped. A stupid, hopeful traitor. I opened it to find Lena standing there, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her jacket. She looked uncomfortable, her gaze fixed on her boots. "Hey," she said, Can I come in for a minute?" I stepped back, holding the door open. She walked in and stood in the middle of the room, not taking her jacket off. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a turmoil that mirrored my own. "No," she said, her voice ragged. "No, it's not." She took a deep breath, like a swimmer about to go under. "Clara, I need to be honest with you. About yesterday." I braced myself. Here it comes. The let's be friends speech. The polite, kind rejection that would somehow be worse than a cruel one. "I like you," she said, the words rushing out. "I really, really like you. More than I've let myself like anyone in a very long time." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. This was not the speech I had been expecting. "But," I prompted, because there was clearly a but the size of a mountain hanging in the air. "But I'm scared," she whispered, and the admission seemed to cost her everything. When I came back here, I made a promise to myself. No more drama, no more fire, just quiet. My work, the woods. It's safe here." She looked around the cabin, at the sturdy bookshelves, at the fire crackling in the hearth we'd shared. "And you're not quiet, Clara. You have this storm inside you. I can feel it, and it calls to a part of me I thought I had buried for good." Her confession was a mirror of my own fears. She was afraid of my fire. I was terrified of being burned by hers. "I don't date," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "I build things that are meant to last. I don't know how to build something that might just explode." It wasn't "I don't date women." It was "I don't date." It was a wall. But it wasn't the one I'd expected. It was a wall built of her own past hurts, her own hard-won peace. "Lena," I said, taking a hesitant step toward her. I'm scared too. The last time I felt this way about someone, I lost everything. I lost myself." I reached out, my hand hovering in the space between us. "But what if we're not building with gasoline and matches this time?" I asked softly. "What if we're building with stone and reclaimed wood? It's slower, it's harder, but it lasts." My fingers brushed against the back of her hand. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. Her skin was cold. "I don't know how," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I admitted. "But I'm willing to learn. With you." I curled my fingers around hers. Her hand was stiff at first. Then, slowly, her fingers intertwined with mine. Her hand was strong, calloused, and it fit in mine like it was made to be there. She looked at our joined hands, then up at my face. The fear was still in her eyes, but there was something else there too. A flicker of hope. A flicker of the same fire she claimed to be so afraid of. And in that moment, I knew I would walk through flames for another chance at that light. The space between us had become a crucible. Her confession, my own admission of fear, it had all been thrown into the fire. And now, we were left with something new, something raw and untested. Her hand was still in mine, a solid, grounding presence. The silence stretched, filled not with tension but with the weight of a decision. "I meant what I said," she said, her voice low and steady now, the tremor gone. "I don't know how to do this." "Then we can be clueless together," I replied, squeezing her hand. "Architects and woodworkers. We're supposed to be good at figuring things out." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Supposed to be. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling. When you looked at me yesterday, on the porch, I wanted to kiss you so badly it felt like I was going to come apart at the seams. The blunt honesty of her words stole the air from my lungs. I ran, she continued, her gaze dropping to our hands. Because that feeling, that's the lightning, that's the fire. That's what I ran from. Maybe it's not the fire you should be afraid of, I said softly, taking a small step closer. Maybe it's the fear of getting burned again. There's a difference. I was so close now I could feel the warmth of her breath, see the intricate flecks of green and gold in her hazel eyes. The scent of pine and sawdust was intoxicating. I am so tired of being cold, Lena. The words were a plea. Her eyes searched mine, looking for something. Reassurance. A promise. I didn't know what I could offer her, but the broken, hopeful truth of myself. I don't want to hurt you, Clara, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And I don't want you to hurt me. I can't promise we won't, I said, the honesty tasting sharp. People hurt each other, even when they don't mean to. But I can promise I will show up. I won't run, I won't undo you. I will see you. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand, a small, tentative gesture that felt monumental. I see you too, she said, her voice barely audible. And then she closed the remaining distance between us. Her other hand came up to cut my jaw, her palm warm against my skin, her thumb stroking my cheekbone. The gesture was so tender, so reverent it made my knees weak. It was nothing like Chloe's possessive, demanding touch. This was a question, an offering. I leaned into her touch, giving her my answer. Her eyes fluttered shut, and then her lips were on mine. The kiss was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't a spark or a flame. It was like the earth settling after a tremor. It was slow and deep and breathtakingly sure. It tasted of coffee and wood smoke and the cold, clean air of the mountain. It was a kiss that wasn't taking, but giving. It was a kiss that said, "Here, this is me, all of me." My hands came up to her waist, pulling her closer, my fingers bunching in the thick fabric of her jacket. She made a soft sound in the back of her throat, a sigh of surrender, and deepened the kiss, her arm wrapping around my back, holding me to her, as if she was afraid I might disappear. We stood there in the middle of the room, locked in an embrace that felt both brand new and centuries old. The fire crackled in the hearth. The house was silent. The whole world was silent. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, her eyes still closed. "Okay," she breathed. Just that one word. It held everything. It held the fear and the hope and the tentative, terrifying beginning of a new chapter. "Okay," I whispered back, my voice shaky. We didn't talk much after that. Words felt clumsy and inadequate. She took her jacket off and hung it on the peg by the door. I made tea. We sat on the sofa, not touching, but the space between us vibrated with a new energy. The external pressure I had been feeling, from my sister, from the ghost of Chloe, from my own self-doubt, seemed to recede, pushed back by the solid, undeniable reality of the woman sitting next to me. Late in the evening, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at it. It was a text from Chloe. My heart seized. I hadn't heard from her in weeks. "Hey, was thinking about you? Hope you're okay." Just that. Casual, unthinking, devastating. Lena must have seen the look on my face. "You okay?" she asked softly. I couldn't speak. I just handed her the phone. She read the message, her expression hardening. Her jaw tightened, the same fierce protective look she'd had when I told her about Chloe leaving me for something normal. She didn't say, "That bitch," or "What does she want?" She just set the phone face down on the table, her movements deliberate. Then she reached over and took my hand. "She doesn't get to live here anymore," Lena said, her voice firm. She tapped her finger against my temple. Or here. She laid her other hand flat against my chest, over my heart. Her touch was a brand. "This is valuable real estate, Clara. You have to be more selective about your tenants." A wet, choked laugh escaped me. The absurdity, the gentleness, the profound truth of her words broke through the shock. "God, you're—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm what?" she prompted, her eyes searching mine. "You're a woodworker," I said, a tear I hadn't realized was there sliding down my cheek. "You see the weak spots, the rot, the poor construction." She wiped the tear away with her thumb. "I also see the good wood," she said softly. "The strong grain. I see what it could be." She held my gaze, her own unwavering. Let her go. Evict her. It was the permission I didn't know I needed. I picked up the phone, my fingers steady. I blocked Chloe's number. Then I deleted her contact entirely. The name, the history, gone in a single decisive swipe. I set the phone back down, the finality of the act settling in my bones. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the scars. But it was a start. It was a foundation. Lena watched me, her expression soft. She didn't say, "I'm proud of you," or "That must have been hard." She just squeezed my hand. We sat like that for a long time, her hand in mine, the fire burning low, the ghosts finally, blessedly, quiet. The morning after was quiet and soft. I woke up on the sofa, a thick quilt tucked around me that I didn't remember pulling over myself. Lena was gone. For a heart-stopping second, panic flared in my chest. It was a dream. You imagined it all. But then I saw her jacket still hanging on the peg by the door. My jacket was hanging right beside it. A small domestic tableau that sent a wave of warmth through me. On the coffee table, next to my now silent phone, was a mug of coffee and a note written on a torn piece of paper in her neat, blocky script. "Went to get eggs. Don't build anything without me." I laughed, the sound rusty in the morning quiet. I took a sip of the coffee. It was still warm. I sat there, wrapped in the quilt, holding the warm mug, and felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. It wasn't the giddy, frantic joy I'd had with Chloe. This was something else, something solid, something real. She returned 20 minutes later, her cheeks flushed from the cold, carrying a small carton of eggs. "Morning," she said, her smile a little shy, as if she wasn't quite sure of her welcome. "Morning," I said, my own smile feeling wide and genuine. "I followed your instructions. No unauthorized construction has occurred." She laughed, the sound filling the small cabin. Good. The awkwardness of the morning after, the "what now?" conversation I had been dreading, never materialized. Instead, we made breakfast. We moved around each other in the small kitchen with an unspoken choreography, a dance of passed spatulas and sidestepped bodies. It was easy. It was normal. Over scrambled eggs and toast, we talked. Not about the future, not about definitions or labels. We talked about the present. "So, your lease is up in 2.5 weeks," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Right," I said, my stomach tightening. It was the first mention of the inevitable end, the real world, waiting for me at the bottom of the mountain. "I have a project starting in the city at the beginning of next month." "The library?" she asked, remembering our conversation in her workshop. I was touched that she'd recalled the detail. "No, a much less romantic corporate headquarters. Pays the bills." We ate in silence for a moment. "You could extend," she said, not looking at me. Her attention suddenly focused on chasing a stray crumb around her plate with her fork. "The cabin's free for the next 2 months." The offer hung in the air, light and fragile. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a marriage proposal. It was an invitation. Stay. Just stay. Lena, I started, my own voice tight with emotion. I don't know what this is. I don't either, she admitted, finally meeting my gaze. Her eyes were clear, honest. But I think I'd like to find out, if you would. My carefully constructed life was in the city. My job, my apartment, my sister. Everything that had defined me before I'd shattered. But what was that life really? A series of obligations and expectations. A life built to impress others. What if I could build a new one? A smaller one? A truer one? I can't stay here forever, I said, the words a painful truth. My whole career is back there. I'm not asking for forever, she said gently. I'm asking for the next 2 months. We can figure out the rest later. It was a plan, a concrete, specific plan. Not for a lifetime, but for the immediate future. It was a single, actionable step. Stay. We'll figure it out. It was exactly what I needed. Okay, I said, the word feeling like the most important one I'd ever spoken. Okay, I'll stay. The relief that washed over her face was so profound. It was like watching the sun break through the clouds. She reached across the table and took my hand. Good, she said simply. Her hand was warm in mine, solid, the hand of a builder. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that whatever we built together, it would be made to last. The weeks that followed were a gift. We didn't solve all the world's problems. My job still existed in the city, a looming deadline on a calendar. Her life was still firmly rooted in the quiet soil of the mountain. The logistics of a future were a tangled, complicated mess we hadn't even begun to broach. But for now, we existed in the small, perfect world we had built together, inside the bubble of the cabin. We learned each other's rhythms, the quiet language of a shared life. I learned that she hummed when she was concentrating, a low, tuneless sound. She learned that I couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, even when it was freezing. We took long walks in the woods, her pointing out different types of trees, me pointing out the structural integrity of rock formations. We worked side by side, me on my laptop at the big oak table, her sketching designs for a new commission. The silence was companionable, punctuated by the scratching of her pencil and the clicking of my keys. It was the most productive I'd been in a year. One afternoon, I drove down to the valley and bought a set of my own tools. When I came back and showed her, she just smiled. About time, she said, and then she spent the rest of the day showing me how to build a simple, sturdy birdhouse. My hands, so used to the smooth, cold surface of a computer mouse, felt clumsy and foreign holding the rough wood. But under her patient guidance, I managed to create something real, something tangible. We hung it on a tree outside the kitchen window, and the next morning a pair of chickadees moved in. It felt like a ridiculous, monumental achievement. The fear didn't vanish completely. It lingered at the edges, a faint shadow. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up with my heart pounding, the ghost of Chloe's betrayal fresh in my mind. But then I'd feel the steady weight of Lena beside me, her slow, even breathing a quiet anchor in the dark, and the fear would recede. She had nightmares too. Sometimes she'd cry out in her sleep, a muffled, pained sound. I'd hold her, stroking her hair, whispering that she was safe, that she was here, until her breathing evened out again. We were two broken things, learning how to lean on each other, finding that our combined strength was more than enough to hold us both up. As the end of my extended stay approached, the real world began to intrude. We had to talk. We sat on the porch one evening, watching the sky bleed into shades of orange and purple. So, I said, breaking the comfortable silence, the city. The city, she repeated, her voice flat. I have to go back, I said, at least for a while, to finish this project, to figure out my apartment, my life. I know, she said quietly. The thought of leaving, of this idyllic bubble bursting, was a physical pain in my chest. This, I said, gesturing between the two of us, at the cabin, at the mountains. I don't want this to be a vacation. It's not a vacation, she said, her voice fierce. She turned to me, her eyes blazing with an intensity that took my breath away. This is the realest thing in my life, Clara. Mine too, I whispered. So what do we do? You go to the city, she said, her voice softening. You finish your project, you tie up your loose ends, and you come back. It was so simple, so sure. What about you? I asked. What about your work? Your life is here. Wood travels, she said with a shrug. And architects can architect from anywhere, right? Especially ones who are into sustainable microhomes. She smiled, a small, hopeful curve of her lips. Maybe our first project together could be designing a place with a workshop big enough for me and a studio with enough northern light for you. My heart swelled. It wasn't a promise, but it was a blueprint, a sketch of a possible future, a future together. I leaned over and kissed her, a long, slow kiss filled with the quiet certainty of all the days we had shared and all the days we hoped to. The future was still scary. It was unwritten, but for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid to pick up the pencil. I looked at this incredible, strong, gentle woman beside me, and I knew that whatever we built, it wouldn't be easy. It would take work and patience and a hell of a lot of trust. But it would be true. It would be ours, and it would be worth it. Have you ever had to choose between the life you thought you wanted and a love that felt like coming home? Let me know your story in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding love where you least expect it.